Today we have the author Gerry Daly with his new book, Childhood Memories. And I suppose we'll start this by asking Gerry, um, what tell us a bit about yourself.
I'm Gerry Daly. I'm originally from Shantala in Galway City. I am currently an employee of Galway City Council. My house now is in Minlo, out on the Coolock Road, up the Dyke Road in Minlo. I'm 61 years
Great,
of age and married with three children.
very good. And where did you get the inspiration for your book?
Basically, what happened now was when I was an employee of Galway City Council, maybe 11, 12 years ago, a gentleman by the name of Brendan Fox introduced myself and other work colleagues to a back to school course with the Galway VEC. So basically, it started off from there with me. I went back then, maybe 10 years ago, and set my junior cert and the following year my leaving cert in English. And I just basically fell in love with reading and writing, basically.
Okay. And what drew you to poetry then from that?
I suppose poetry, as a child in my house in Chantala, we came from a very large family, and my mother was a furbo lady, very quiet woman, but loved stories and loved telling stories, and was fantastic in the kitchen with neighbours coming from Furbo, and they'd be speaking the Gaelic. Now, we didn't have the Irish, unfortunately, but my mother did. But I was always fascinated with the stories and old history of Galway and just in general listening to people. I love listening to people and I love their stories. And from that, then I just took myself and I started writing my own versions of breakdown of some of the stories and some of the people that I would have grown up with and worked with as a child and that up around the farmers and bringing in the turf and the bog and all that type of stuff.
Yeah. And so, was there any specific message you wanted to convey with your poetry?
For me, the one message, if anything, that I could like to send out to people is that people with literary problems, it is a big problem in Ireland still to this day. A lot of people may think it's not, but I know, speaking from my own generation, it's a big problem. And I think if the book that I have out currently, if one person could take one word or one line from any poem in it and say, you know what, I think I would like to do that myself, and that would be absolutely the biggest thrill and the biggest kick for me. It's not the book itself. While I loved writing the poetry and a whole lot of it, it's not for self gain. It's not for self purpose. It's if I could just get one person that has difficulties to come out and say, you know what, if this guy can do it, I can do it, and that to me would be great satisfaction.
Yeah. And so, do you think there's a favorite piece from the book that you would like to mention that the people would like specifically?
In relation to a lot of the stuff in the book, it goes back to my childhood in the streets in Shannon, farmers I worked with, and met. There's a lot of poems in relation to, obviously, people won't know them, only people that were connected to man there. They would have been
Yeah.
farmers, and they brought us up with great belief and great views on life. In relation to all the poems, there's some of them very deep, some of them are very just short and nitty ones, and so on. In relation to one poem in particular that it does something for me myself. It's in relation to imagery. Is a poem called "The Boring," and it's dedicated to a lady by the name of Hannah. Now, Hannah was a friend that I met at the very beginning of COVID. She's an American lady that was renting an apartment with her boyfriend out in Minlo and used to walk the roads every day. And just one day out of conversation in the garden, I asked them, did they ever know or walk the boring at the back of my house? And they said they didn't. And I brought them up the boring walking. And it was just walking that boring every day with both of them that I listened to this lady, Hannah, speak of the beauty of the boring and the cobbled walkways and the imagery of it. And it was over a period of time I began to realise that sometimes in life it takes a complete stranger to open our eyes to the beauty that's around us. And I sat in, and it took me a long time to write that particular poem because there's a lot in that poem. But for me, it stands out in relation to all the poems, the imagery of it in particular. I think Walking the Boring, and that to me would stand out. There's obviously poems about people that I would have played soccer with Galway United that have since sadly passed away. There's a lot of other stuff like that in there, but to answer your question, for me, the one that I particularly got pleasure out of writing would be The Boring. Yeah.
And I suppose coming from that, did you find it difficult ever trying to piece the stories together and to try tell it in a satisfying way, considering, you're only started from education recently?
Yeah, I think anyone that had difficulty. To this day, I still have a lot of difficulty with spellings and stuff, but I'll always work my way around it. Expression it's in all our heads. It's only a matter of how do you get it out. And I think the biggest problem to this day with me, and I'd be a very positive person, but I think a lot of negativity still stems around the fact of anxiety, depression, literacy. I mean, I think they're all connected in some small way, because the art of anything is expression, and to be able to express yourself is a great gift, I think. And for me, I to this day, if I'm in a crowded room writing, I still get edged, I still get nervous. Whereas if I'm in a room by myself, I sit down, I will use my dictionary, I'll use whatever, and I work around it that way. But it's just the inspiration, I think, came from me at the fact of looking at people who were held back, not because of their intelligence or their lack of intelligence, but purely because of the way we were taught back when I was in school in the 60s and the 70s.
Yeah. And I suppose, would that be the audience you're aiming for then? Do you think that 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 base that probably didn't get the best education or didn't get the best chance? Do you think that's who you'd be aiming towards?
Hand on heart, I would have to say yes. That would be my main prerogative in this in all of this. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff in the book that I know that people I would have grown up with, people that I would have been involved with soccer with when I was younger, they'll probably see some stuff in there that say, God, I remember that, or I remember this. But yeah, to answer your question, my core thing would be, it's as I said from day one to the publisher Marguerite, it's not and never will be about me. It's all, hopefully it can help somebody else to go back and say, do you know what, I do have difficulty with reading and writing. I would like a bit of attention. I'd like a bit of help. And without the people that I met through my job, and indeed with the Galway VC, one particular man, Tony Sweeney, who taught me, the likes of them people, like the work that they do in the background that is not publicised or advertised, I think it's unbelievable work that they're doing, them people. So yeah, to answer your question, yeah, the core would be for people with literary problems, yeah.
And of course, you've close ties to Galway. And what do you think was your biggest thing when you're talking about Galway and your childhood there? What do you think was your favorite part of Galway when you were growing up, and just in general, I suppose?
Yeah, I think really, I'm not just myself here. I'd say most people at my age would tell you now that when COVID hit, whatever 3 to 4 years ago, I think people literally took a look at themselves and started looking back at the way they used to live. And I'm even talking about people, younger people than me, teenagers who never realised what came upon us. And during them 3 years, I really took a long look back at the childhood that I had and the simplicity of it. I mean, it's the old story. It's not maybe negative. No telly in the house and no mobile phones. And the gift at that time was families, neighbours, and friends, and the conversation. And it was all about culture, mixing together, helping each other out. And I think we've lost that. I don't know. Was it the Celtic Tiger? I think was one of the biggest, in my personal view anyway. One of the worst things that happened to Ireland, and it's race of people, because I love to see the different cultures coming to Ireland currently. I love talking to these people and mixing with these people, hearing about their cultures. And I think we'll find as we're getting older, we'll all find that everything changes. Absolutely, we have to go with change, we have to go with the times. But we should equally try, if we can, to never let our past go either. Hold on to our past if we can, because it's where we came from after all.
Yeah, yeah, and that kind of camaraderie with people, definitely something that you wanted to convey with the book, because it is missing. And like you say with COVID, that kind of compassion that they'd say we had back in the days. It's definitely an important message from the book, and of course childhood memories, I suppose.
Yeah. Well,
And
yeah, sorry, my apologies. Yeah. No, it's
no,
all,
go on, please.
it is genuinely for me all about the memories. I mean, when I grew up, as I say, my mother came from Forbo. She would have been a very quiet lady. She was a great listener. Loved people coming to the house. Loved if she could helping people. I mean, it was a case that time of if we didn't have bread, somebody break bread for us. If we had eggs, we passed on the eggs to them. And there was no embarrassment about it at the time, because quite simply, every family had the same problem, and everyone helped each other. And it's kind of then when you go out into the real world and you have to say, right now it's a case of me having to go working and me having to do this. And back in the 60s that I grew up in, it wasn't a case of, you stick in school, you go along with your education. It was the opposite. It was a case of right? You had a big family. Whoever was in work, if they went off and got married, you were next in line. You went to work, and so on. And it was just part of the times. But it was acceptance. If I was to compare my youth to my children's youth, it was that we were more acceptable. Anything that came our way, we just adapted to the change. Whereas now, I think that's leaving. It's a case of up the ladder at all costs, and I don't like to see that
Yeah.
myself.
Yeah, there's been a bit of loss of tradition with things, and yeah, like you say, there is a lot of climbing the ladder, and that kind of tradition with families and just people being more connected. Do you think that's missing in Galway now, or would you say it's still there, but just not the same as it would have been?
It's not. It's not that it's not there. It is there. I think what's lacking, if in my opinion, is that the communication skills are not as good as they used to be. I believe. I mean, don't get me wrong. I find education to be a great gift. I think it's a great thing to have. But sometimes with that education, what people are forgetting about is the actual needs of people to be able to knock at your next door neighbour's house to say, is everything okay or whatever. And I just find the modern world that we're in, it's about success more so than people. And people are sometimes be forgotten, sadly. Now, in current times, you hear most people say to me, I don't listen to the news anymore. I blanked off because quite simply they're not able to listen to the news anymore. But if you go back again, and I hear probably doing it, but I think I have to. If you go back to the 60s and the 70s, there was a case of no coal for that range. It was cooking on that range. It was no fridge in the what we used to call a scullery. It's now called a kitchen, and it was a case of adapting to that change. Whereas now, because things like going back, I suppose 1990s, late 1990s, when success came, with it came everything, money, success, and so on, and people again were left behind.
Yeah,
And I would just love to think
yeah,
we're never going to go back to them times, obviously, ever. But
yeah,
I just think that people would want to really, like, really open their eyes to say, be it Helen up the road or John up the road, I haven't seen him for 4 weeks. Is he okay or is she okay? And that's it's sadly it's been lost, I think.
yeah. But I suppose, through your book, I think people will be able to see that. And we'd like to thank you for working with Tribes Press. And I suppose, do you think there's anything else you'd like to add on now, just
I don't
before
know.
we finish up?
Basically, in relation to the actual book itself, I have to absolutely compliment the my publisher Marguerite, because her lovely way and her lovely mannerisms of talking to me and encouraging me to put the poems together in the book actually did encourage me fantastically, and I'm forever grateful to her for that. Yeah, and I think